Hey, everybody, it's Bob here, local football flavor coming at you Monday. And we're right here, right before Thanksgiving, ready to give you advice, ready to talk to you about all the comings and goings of week 12 in the NFL for fantasy football purposes. We had a couple of big injuries this week to some offensive linemen for New England. We had a couple games that were quite unexpected for most people, a couple of lame duck performances from some studs. JMO giving us a 0 for the week didn't look very good. But there's a lot of things that are happening. And as we make this final push for the fantasy playoffs for your season, we want to get down to business right away. Here at Local Football Flavor, if you ever have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. We do answer all questions here. If we don't get to it right away, please stick around. We will answer everything that comes our way. So we're going to start here with Steve. Steve, welcome. Mick, welcome to the show. It's good to have you both here today. Steve, when we talk about tight ends has been one of those categories this year that has had a lot of ebb and flow. There's been a lot of good games, a lot of bad games for some tight ends, and a lot of games that you're like, well, that's pretty well expected. When we look at this question specifically, I just want to talk a little bit about the tight ends that you've listed here and their prospects for moving forward. I know it's a quick hit, but I think this is one of those important questions when we think about season long. What do we want to look for, right? And one of the biggest things so far this NFL season that we have come to an understanding of is that Cincinnati cannot stop the tight end. So first and foremost, I know that none of these are playing Cincinnati, but that would be one of my priorities. If it was available to me, I would be trying to get any tight end that plays against the Bengals. We saw again this week, Hunter Henry just absolutely torched them. And Hunter Henry isn't one of those players to really do that often. The Bengals have the Ravens Thursday, November 27th, which is coming up this week, and December 14th. They also play the Bills, Dolphins, and Cardinals. The Cardinals are that Week 17 matchup. So while you can't get Trey McBride, I think that I would be looking at one of the first tight ends. I know it's not listed here for you, Steve, but I would be looking into Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely if they happen to be on the waiver wire in any capacity. I know Lamar has been struggling as a quarterback since that 4-touchdown performance, and he hasn't been doing well from a fantasy perspective. But I think that's one of the things that I would look into to see if those were available to me. Secondly, Theo Johnson has a great schedule going forward for tight ends, and he has two quarterbacks that their aim is to win games, and they're throwing the ball a good amount in these games. So for me, when I look at Theo Johnson's upcoming schedule, what we see coming down the pipeline here, right, is Patriots, Commanders, Vikings, Raiders. And then they have that Cowboys game last week of the season, but that doesn't really help you very much. Commanders are going to be one of those teams that you are going to be able to pass on. Vikings similarly, and Raiders as well. Now, all these teams play tight ends a little bit differently, and they can get scrubbed out of a game. But what we do know is that Theo Johnson has become an integral part of this passing offense for the New York Giants. And when we look at Theo Johnson, he's getting a good amount of targets for a tight end, around 5. And he has that playmaking ability to do a little bit more than these other tight ends can with some of their pass catching upside. Now, when we look at Otton is a guy that I'd stay away from right now. With the big injury to Baker Mayfield, we don't know what Baker Mayfield's health is going to look like in the return of Bucky Irving. I can't really see Teddy Bridgewater relying on Otton. Historically speaking, Teddy Bridgewater does like to try to get it to those outside wide receivers. So I'm a little bit out there on Otton. And we see you there, Galaxy. And Strange, again, I think having to rely on Trevor Lawrence, and again, he's getting a decent amount of looks when he's on the field. Coming back from that injury, I think he will eventually walk into more. His strength of schedule going forward is pretty good. But again, it's one of those ones where relying on Trevor Lawrence to get the ball to him, I think, is one that you might it might be a little bit worse off. Speaking specifically about that Week 16 game against Denver, if you are playing in that Week 16 game, I'm definitely not going to be starting him Week 16, but I would be thinking about starting him Week 17. So he's one of those guys that he is on my radar, but strictly as a Week 17 guy. And then Brock Wright, the opportunity is going to present itself for Brock Wright in the upcoming weeks. But the thing to be aware of, though, is that although he was on the field a lot, his targets were around 4 as well. But they're not using Brock Wright in the same capacity as they might use Sam Laporta. So it's not necessarily a one-for-one trade. Hey, how's it going? Feel free to put a question in the chat if you have one. We're answering all questions here at Local Football Flavor. And then Colby Parkinson. Colby Parkinson is one of those guys that the Rams are running out 2 to 3 tight ends a lot to go along with Devontae Adams and to go along with Puka. And the tight end is absolutely third man up in the totem pole in terms of targets, maybe even fourth at times. Colby Parkinson is the top of the totem pole right now with Tyler Higbee out. And while the matchups aren't incredible for Colby Parkinson moving forward, he's going to have some life in some of these matchups. Taking a look at specifically when we take a look here at Week 16 against Seattle, and Week 17 is not the best matchup. So Week 16 is one of those matchups that you probably could capitalize on. But again, I think to the top of this list, with Theo Johnson being the best one out of this list, and secondly, with Strange being up there for Week 17 and Parkinson for the weeks prior to that, I think you can play, roulette here on tight end a little bit. And these guys all are going to probably land somewhere in that 8-point to 10-point category. And if you get 14 points out of them, that means they got a touchdown, and you're probably going to pop them into your and at the top of your, lineups and DFS. They're going to be a great play. Mick, we see the question here. I'm going to get to that after we get to Galaxy's question here. Galaxy, you have a roster of JT, Judkins, Marks and Harvey, Lamb, London, Odunze, and Diggs. Should you trade Lamb, London, and Judkins for CMC and Devonta Smith? The roster is JT, Judkins, Marks, Harvey, Lamb, London, Odunze, and Diggs. Here's my thoughts on this, Galaxy, is I'm only thinking about potentially doing that if I've already got a playoff spot lined up. Here's what you need to know, right? What you already do know is that CMC's bye week is week 14. Not going to help you if you're fighting for a playoff spot, and that week is something that you're going to need. So I'm thinking that you've already considered that in some capacity or another. Secondly, when we look at a guy like JT, it seems that when teams are game planning for JT, they have a way of doing so that can kind of scrub him out of the touchdown market, right? So when we look at how this can present itself over the next coming weeks. So week 13, this upcoming week, they play Houston. Week 14, they play the Jags. Week 15, they play Seattle. Week 16, they play San Francisco. And week 17, they play the Jags again. So for me, when we look at a guy like JT, he's probably still going to be in that 80 yards to 150 like he has normally been doing. So you have the week 14 bye, you have the bye locked up. So that's good. So when it comes down to it, what I would be looking at here is you're giving up really two good pieces there with Lamb and London. And I know what we saw this past week is that Lamb seems to be playing at times second fiddle to George Pickens. But still, Lamb is always one of those reliable players that always has the potential to get a touchdown, even 2 touchdowns at times. London's injury makes me want to trade him more. When we take a look at London, particularly with Kirk Cousins not really performing well, and just in general, the whole team kind of is fizzling around that move to Kirk Cousins. When we look at the schedule upcoming for week 15, 16, and 17, it's a great matchup week 15, but week 16 and 17 looks like it could be very competitive, but a little bit more iffy in terms of how many good targets that London's going to get. And then Judkins. We all know that Judkins, unless he's getting a touchdown or 2, he's always going to have a higher floor, but also a floor that is at times, sometimes one that you wouldn't want out of your RB2. I really like Diggs' schedule moving forward. The only thing that I would be questioning on is wanting to start Odunze on a week-to-week basis. Odunze has that same floor as Judkins, and looking at the upcoming schedule, I would want to ask myself, do I see that a guy like Rome Odunze could overperform in the games that they have left? Definitely week 17 against San Francisco is a matchup that I want to take advantage of, right? But week 15 and week 16 against Green Bay and against Cleveland, those matchups could be a little bit tight. So I don't want to over-rely on Odunze. However, with all that being said, we take a look at CMC's rest of season schedule, and there's no reason why they won't overuse CMC in this capacity as they fight their way to potentially making a playoff spot. We look at these matchups for CMC. Chicago, week 17, week 16, Indy, week 15 against Tennessee as well. So Chicago, Indy, and Tennessee. That's one of the better playoff schedules for a running back. Devonta Smith, head and shoulders, one of those players that I want for my playoff run as well. So long and short here, Galaxy, is while you are giving up a lot in Lamb, London, and Judkins, you are getting a lot back in return for CMC and Devonta Smith. This is a fair trade. It's definitely got quite a bit of risk in it in terms of your wide receivers. But in all honesty, if I can go out on the waiver wire and pick up a little bit of extra on the side, or maybe trade Marks or Harvey, whichever one you feel doesn't have the best playoff schedule, to pick up another wide receiver in the vein of, like, say, an Alec Pierce, if you might need one, you could do that. I would do this trade, but it does have a lot of risk, and CMC still carries that injury risk. But all players do. So in my mind, I would do this for a playoff push. It gives you it gives you a really solid JTCMC, solid elite 30 to 40 point plus upside. Judkins doesn't have that right now. And you're giving up players that have that upside as well to move into Devonta Smith and CMC. I would do this, but it's definitely a lot of inherent risk involved in it. So definitely consider that before you pull the trigger on that. I would start Pearsall or Juwan Jennings. So if we're talking about in today's matchup, I think that both players have a pretty good matchup. When we look at the slate for today, when we see that how Carolina plays wide receivers, Juwan Jennings is going to be your de facto number one wide receiver. Pearsall's going to be working out of the slot a little bit more. I think that what you're looking at here is, because of the way that this game might be competitive right now, I think that I want the player who might see a little bit more over-the-top action, and that's going to be Juwan Jennings for me. I think that Juwan Jennings probably gets a touchdown this week. Somewhere, he's been getting a good amount of targets every game, and I think that that's worth capitalizing on in a game like this that might, like I said, might be weirdly competitive to that capacity. So we look at last week getting 6 targets, the week before that 9 targets, and I think he has that touchdown upside in him. So I'd go Juwan. I know I love Ricky Pearsall, but I just don't think he's there quite yet. Maybe this will be the week that he's there, but I'm not really quite sure if he's going to be consistently there yet. How much fab for Devin Neal? I would say 0. So here's why I say that, Jason. I know that running backs are very valuable, and I know that having the starting running back for any team is something that is possibly worth it. But Devin Neal didn't look great, and the Saints don't look good either. So when we look at this from that perspective and we say, okay, he did get a good amount of looks this past week when that injury happened. But also, this is the thing we've been saying about most Saints running backs for most of the year, is what do those looks actually turn into? So what do they actually turn into? And for me, you could see that if you wanted to pick up Devin Neal, you can definitely get that pass catching upside that Kamara had and get a nice serviceable week somewhere in that like 10 to 13 point category if you're lucky. But I just don't see a lot of upside for him. If I wanted to spend fab on him, he's probably the last player before this playoff push that you would want to spend fab on, to be honest with you, because most of the players that are probably out there right now, nobody's really clamoring to get. So whatever you have left, I'd say I'd throw like 15% on it, unless I knew somebody was really starting for a running back, and then I just outproduce it. I mean, at this point in time, if you have the rolling waivers with the fab, I think you could spend as much as you wanted, because he does seem to be the last player that's going to be available, unless the guys like Brian Robinson, CMC were to get hurt or something like that. So for me, I personally wouldn't spend any on it. I did get Devin Neal a couple weeks ago. I put him back into the pool, and I'm not really mad about it either. Personally, I wouldn't spend any money on him, but I can see spending at least 15% of whatever I had remaining. And if I noticed somebody needed a running back, I'd spend a little bit more on that. I'm down by 20, but he's got no one left. And I have Purdy, Rico, and Tet. Can I win? I think you're going to blow their brakes off there, Jason. When we talked on Thursday, I believe it was, I think Purdy has a really safe floor this week, somewhere in the vein of 2 touchdowns, 200 yards. Where we see that upside is going to be a little bit tricky. Then when we go with Ricky Pearsall, I think you're going to see Ricky Pearsall with at least 3 receptions this week. Hopefully a little bit more for those people that want to start Ricky Pearsall. Rico is most likely going to get 16 carries in this game for at least 60 yards. He could see 60 yards in the first quarter of this game. And Tet is probably locked into at least 4 receptions. So already there with those numbers, you've already cleared that 20. So for me, I think that you are going to take this down pretty handily, if I'm being honest. I'm up 20 with Kittle left, and he has Rico and Jennings left. Can I win? So this one's going to be a little bit more tricky, Jason. So like I said earlier, I think Rico's locked into at least 16 carries, at least 70 yards. Jennings, I have at least 5 or 6 targets for him, if not a little bit more at 9. So in order for you to win, you're going to need to have Kittle get a touchdown and at least 4 receptions. That's not out of the realm of possibility for a guy like George Kittle, but I think it's going to be a little bit more challenging. If he gets that touchdown, I think you win. If he doesn't get the touchdown, I think it's going to be a little bit tricky. Assuming Hampton's not back this week, I only have Rico for running backs unless I win. Devin Neal also. But if I don't, which running back 2 would you start? Vidal, Monangai, Pollard, Knight, Carter, or Stevenson. So for me, Pollard's off the menu, guys. Pollard has been off the menu because it's been showing that the Titans can't move the ball. And we know that Pollard was a volume play to start with. And now the fact that he is getting, that same amount of volume that he was getting towards the towards the early end of last year, it's a bummer. Then when we go to the rest of the running backs on the slate here for week 13, let's take a look at their look ahead schedule here for Thursday for the games coming up this week. So when I see that the Chargers are playing the Raiders, I'm absolutely going to be able to rule into Kamani Vidal if I wanted to. They just ended up getting rid of Chip Kelly. Ashton Genty's also hurt. So you can see them passing the ball a decent amount, the Raiders. And if they're passing the ball a decent amount, the Chargers are going to want to control this game a little bit more so that Geno can't light it up for like 42 pass attempts, right? So in my mind, I think Vidal does top that list of players that are worth starting this week. Then when you go down to the rest of the players on the slate, while Stevenson has a good matchup, I do have concern with the split. If you want to start Stevenson, the reason that I have a concern about that split is that Trevion Henderson has overtaken him in the backfield. Again, coming back from the injury, he had 9 routes, 6 carries to Trevion's 18 carries. So they're going to be using Trevion more. Stevenson can get a goal line work as well, but I think he is untrustworthy even in a good matchup. Then you go into Monangai. And when you look at Monangai, it seems that the Bears are going to be riding the hot hand. Swift fumbled. The Bears were running it a little bit more. I think Monangai, I'm still staying away from Monangai, knowing that the Eagles do project as a better rush defense out of that grouping of players. So I think I'm avoiding him as well. So then it comes down to, do I want to take a chance on Knight or Carter. And we see that the Cardinals are playing. The Cardinals are here playing the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers just lost Baker Mayfield potentially a little bit longer than you might want. And the Tampa, you can pass on them a good amount, and that tends to lead to less rushing need. And I think that Jacoby Brissett could do enough damage to this Tampa secondary. So for that reason, I think that I'm on Vidal, then one of Knight or Carter, probably Knight because he's getting more looks. And then you can roll into Stevenson or Monangai, whoever you thought would have a chance like that. Hey, Joel. 12-0 last time we talked. I said Sanders would be good pickup. Joe didn't think so. I could say to Joe, told you so. Quincy, while Sanders didn't, break the bank, he was a perfectly acceptable starting option if you needed to start him. Did not really perform to upwards of like super fantasy potential. But what I do like to see, again, it was the Raiders, but 11 for 20 for 209 yards. And I think that when we see what he's going to do moving forward, I think it's going to have to involve a better game plan here. The Raiders are not a barn beater of a team, but I think you want to get a couple more passing opportunities out of Shedeur. I'd like to see him get up to like 25, 26, and I'd like to see those rushing attempts get up a little bit as well for Judkins. I told you guys I think he had a little bit of potential. Would I wanted to start him this week? Not really. But I'm glad to see that you're still 12-0, Quincy. That's always nice. Also, any defenses you like to pick up now for the Week 16, Week 17 stretch? Yeah, actually, for sure. And Mick, I haven't forgotten about your DD. We will get into that. So what I'm looking at here is defenses that have these matchups, because as we saw, Seattle was supposed to have one of the best matchups on the slate. The defense had been kind of lights out in terms of the takeaway category, and that did not materialize against Tennessee for some reason, and that was a little bit disheartening for anybody that decided to start Seattle over Tennessee. But when I look at Week 16, Week 17, and we see, all right, who are some teams that you can definitely go after, right? So again, as I look at it, and I said this about 2 weeks ago, I thought the Saints would be a good Week 16, Week 17 play. But with Tyrod Taylor, I do question if the Saints play is better at that point in time, because Tyrod Taylor is a better quarterback than Justin Fields. We all know, we've already said it. And the same with the Titans. The Titans, I'm not sure that they're coming alive, but they play the Saints in Week 17. So for me, the Saints is still one of those teams that's up there as a possibility. I think that it's one that you could capitalize on. Secondly, I know that the Giants also had their defense isn't that great, and they also had some coaching changes in that defense as well. But the Vikings have been trash. J.J. McCarthy is dealing with a concussion right now, so I'm curious to see if J.J. McCarthy will be starting Week 16. And then we know Geno's been sucking. So can Ashton Genty, if Ashton Genty's healthy, beat the Giants? Sure. But I think that the Giants, despite them being a trash play for most of the year and them not playing well as a defense overall, I think could be very interesting against a Vikings offense that lacks an offense and a Raiders team that also lacks an offense. So I do think that out of like the dregs, that those are two of the defenses that you can definitely capitalize on. Now, if you want to go after potentially a better defense that might still be available on the waiver wire, again, the Patriots draw the Jets. They've been playing a little bit less stoutly recently. And they draw the Ravens, and the Ravens offense hasn't been playing lights out as well. The Packers are interesting. Again, Bears and then Vikings. I think I'd rather take them for the Week 17 match than the Week 16 match, but Caleb Williams can make a lot of mistakes, and they're a team that if they're on your waiver wire that I'm absolutely interested in buying into. And I think that who I like kind of stops there. Of course, the Texans against the Raiders week 16 is a phenomenal matchups, but they draw the Chargers in week 17, which is a less phenomenal matchup. So that's kind of how I feel right now. And that could change based off of performances in week 13, 14, and 15. But I think that all things considered, that's probably the way to go. And the Rams in week 16, or the Rams in week 17 and the Rams in week 16 are interesting to me as well. I know they're probably rostered, so that's kind of the problem with defenses like that. They're probably already rostered. Set my lineup this week, Jason. 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, tight end, 2 flexes. All right, let's go to week 13 schedule here. All right. So taking a look at what you got here, I do think that Bo Nix is a better play than Dart this week. Assuming that Dart plays, the matchup for Dart is a little less friendly in my mind. I know that New England can play quarterbacks differently than most teams. They are going to have to change their game plan a little bit, though, because of all the injuries on the offensive line. Again, New England is not super terrible against quarterbacks. I mean, if you look at it, the last 4 games, it says they're 32nd ranked in quarterbacks. That's only because they've been giving up the most touchdowns or one of the highest rates of touchdowns to quarterbacks. And that's usually because teams are trying to either come from behind against them or pull out something. You're welcome, Jason. Or pull out something in the fourth quarter. So Dart's not a bad play, but the Commanders are a team that Bo Nix can capitalize on. They haven't really played anything well on defense recently. So it is a toss-up. I do think that both of those plays are going to be good plays, but I do question, with all the changes to schemes and stuff, if they're going to hand the ball back to Dart right now, knowing that he is still in that concussion protocol. I would be a little bit concerned about that. Joe Burrow is also, on the menu as well. He's going to be playing this week, week 13 here. They play the Ravens and a divisional matchup on a short week. I still don't think that he plays, but I am curious to see how that transpires. So for me, I'd be on Nix or Dart. I'd be really tempted from Joe Burrow because the Ravens can't stop anything on defense. So, from that perspective, I think that that's something to be considered. But I do like Bo Nix a little bit more this week. And again, that's a tough call. Genty, Warren, Cook, Rico, and Wilson. Well, what it's looking like is Genty may miss this week. Yeah, I got it, Mick. I will definitely get to that one. Genty may miss this week with an ankle injury. So I would be wary of that. And I would kind of look into that a little bit as the week goes on to see what's going on with that injury. I do think against the Chargers, you could start him. But I think with an injury and with that team, again, playing overall really poorly, I don't think they're going to rush back arguably their best or their second best player. The Chargers are giving up about 15 rushing attempts on the year or over the last 4 games that they've played. So it's not really a great look for Genty, and I don't see a lot of touchdowns coming his way anyway, so I'm off Genty. Then we look at Cook, and the Bills are playing, I believe they're playing against who we got here. The Bills are playing against the Steelers, and I think that's a phenomenal matchup for James Cook. So I am starting Cook, and I understand, Jaylen Warren got a little bit outsnapped by Kenneth Gainwell, but I do think Warren, with that injury, it's something to watch out for too. I heard he got a little bit dinged up in that game. I think he's an interesting start. So for me, my 2 running backs that I'm starting are both of the running backs from that game. Now we come down to your wide receivers. So far I'm on Nix, Warren, and Cook. And then Jason, coming down here to the wide receiver market, I think that you've got to start St. Brown. The looks that he's been getting over the last couple of weeks, the looks that he's been getting his entire career, really is something to just dive into headlong. You're not starting him. Now, DJ Moore, got a good amount of targets in this game, got a touchdown as well. But when we look at the Week 13 slate and we see who the Bears got on the menu, we're looking at the Eagles. I don't think that's a phenomenal matchup for DJ Moore, so he's on the bench. Waddle coming here, Waddle against the Saints. I think that I can start Waddle against the Saints, so he's one of my 3 wide receivers there. So then we're looking at Ladd, Pittman, and Shakir. When I look at Ladd what do we say? The Chargers are against the Raiders. Yeah, I'm absolutely starting Ladd in that matchup. So for me, I would roll into Ladd, Waddle, and St. Brown for my 3 wide receivers. Tight end, like I said, I think it's dealer's choice at tight end over the next couple of weeks. When we look at the matchups that are coming down the pipeline for you, Theo Johnson. Again, the Patriots, it's a good enough matchup, but maybe not one that's great for Theo Johnson. I think I could lean into him a little bit more though, because he has that upside. And then we take a look at Dallas Goedert, and Dallas Goedert is a victim of the system, right? So he can have blow up games against the Bears. It's perfectly plausible that he has a blow up game. The Bears don't play tight ends well at all. Again, the Steelers, Pat Freiermuth had a touchdown, and, the Steelers tight ends did get involved in that game. So for me, yeah, I could see myself rolling into Dallas or Theo, probably lean a little bit more on Theo for volume. Dallas would be your big play. So far we've got Nix, Warren, Cook, St. Brown, Waddle, Ladd, Dallas Goedert. And then for my 2 flexes, if Wilson is playing, I think that Wilson would be my guy against the Lions. Again, the Lions have a pretty good run defense, but the way that the Packers utilize running backs and the way that these games on Thanksgiving are super hyper competitive, and the fact that the Packers just don't want to throw the ball a lot recently for some reason, I think you can lean a little bit more on Wilson in your flex. And then looking at the matchup for Rico against the Rams, I'm probably benching Rico Dowdle in that case. And then I think that I'd probably land somewhere on Pittman or Shakir. And I'd probably lean a little bit more into Shakir because the Steelers defense is not very good against wide receivers. We saw this again with Caleb Williams. So all in all, Jason, I know it's a long answer and you asked for a quick hit, but we want Nix, Warren, Cook, Emmanuel Wilson if Jacobs isn't playing, which it doesn't look like he will, St. Brown, Waddle, Ladd, Shakir, and then Dallas Goedert. But you can easily flip Dallas for Theo as well. And I don't think you'd be that disappointed in it. All right, let's go back up here to mixed question. One again, 8-3 first place. 1 win from the bye. Caleb Williams and Daniel Jones are the quarterbacks. Jonathan Taylor and Jahmyr Gibbs are the running backs with Harvey and Judkins. J-Mo, Garrett Wilson, Christian Watson, Pearsall, Slayton, Tez are the wide receivers. McBride is the tight end. And Harvey, I'm not sure if you put that twice. The trade deadline is soon. I can't give up Gibbs or Taylor anymore, but you want to package them for usable wide receivers. So, Mick, the reason I saved your deep dive here for a little bit was just because I've been really thinking about the wide receivers that have been going through my mind of who I would actually want, who has been serviceable and who has not been serviceable. So looking at your team right now, you have a lot of potentially high upside guys, but they're going to need to get that touchdown to really activate or actualize that upside. And we saw J-Mo can throw up a 0. We know that Christian Watson is capable of throwing up a 0 as well. So what you're looking for is guys that are going to get volume, who already are involved pretty good within their system. One of the guys that I would target, and it's not going to cost you a lot, but it would be Jacoby Myers. I told this to you guys, I think it was about 3 weeks ago. It takes wide receivers a little bit longer to acclimate to their new digs. And Joe was vehemently against me saying Jacoby Myers as a potential trade target. But he's always on the cusp of either being traded or you wanting to trade him or you wanting to get into him. So when I look at Jakobi Meyers, over the course of the next couple of weeks, he draws some pretty favorable matchups if he's going to be the primary target earner or one of the primary target earners. We see in the last 2 games, he's earned 6 targets a game, okay? He's earned 6 targets a game. So when I look at this and I say, hey, like, is it possible that he continues to earn 6 targets if BTJ is out or is not playing? Yeah. When BTJ comes back, is he still capable of earning 6 targets? Yeah, I think he is. And I don't think it's going to cost you a lot to move into a guy like Jakobi Meyers. I know he got to touchdown this week, and that changes things a little bit. So I would keep my eye on a swivel for that. Second guy that I would look at would be Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs is also a product of the system, okay? So when we look at Stephon Diggs, yeah, he had another dud of a game this week. But we do know that May is going to throw the ball a good amount, okay? And the fact of the matter is that with these offensive linemen getting hurt, they're going to have to utilize him a little bit more. He fluctuates very wildly. He could go from 3 targets to 12 targets, okay? But he's a guy that has a good schedule going forward and a guy that you can absolutely use on your team, moving a guy like Harvey or Judkins or whatnot and pivoting yourself into one of those pivoting yourself into him, I think, would be a good play if I'm looking for a wide receiver that has upside. We've talked a lot about Zay Flowers over the last couple of weeks. I do have concerns for Zay as, with Lamar playing the way that he's playing. So I do have concerns about that. Jalen Waddle is on the menu as well. When we look at Waddle and we say, okay, he has one of the higher strength of schedules for a wide receiver moving forward. He's the main target earner in this offense, and he's a player that you could absolutely utilize on your team right now. So when I look at his numbers and the schedule upcoming for Miami, you're looking at week 13 this week. Miami draws the Saints. Week 14, Miami is going to draw the Jets. Week 15, as you enter into the fantasy playoffs here, they're going to play against the Steelers, which is a great matchup. And then you have some divisional games, I believe, here coming down the pipeline for the Dolphins. But all week 16, they play the Bengals as well. Another great matchup for them. And then they have in week 17, who do they have in week 17 here? I'm not pulling it on my, they have the Buccaneers, which is a great matchup for him. So for me, those are the top 3 targets that I would kind of go after. I would go after Waddle. I would go after Diggs, and I would go and try to get, who did I mention? I can't even remember who the other guy was that we mentioned. I was just kind of trying to figure out who has these good schedules, right? And so when you look at this, I'm avoiding everybody from Atlanta. I'm avoiding everybody from Houston. I think that Michael Wilson is still an interesting target. Greg Dortch is a very low waiver wire fodder kind of guy. We'll see what happens when Marvin Harrison Jr. comes back. And again, Shamari Dyke is an interesting play. We talked about him on the show last week. We've talked about him on the show the week before. In the absence of Alec Eiermanner, in the absence of Calvin Ridley, I think that Shamari Dyke is one of those guys that he's not going to cost you a lot. He might even still be on your waiver wire, and you could easily do a 1-for-1 piece into him. And I think that that's going to be a good play for you moving forward. Oh, Jakobi Meyers was the other guy we were talking about. So Diggs, Jakobi Meyers, Jalen Waddle, and Shamari Dyke are 4 guys that I think schedule-wise and team-wise, that those are players that I want to target. And you could give up J-Mo if you want to. You could trade away Garrett Wilson as well, depending on how you feel with the injury and everything. But that's kind of how it would operate. And we can talk more about it as the show goes on as well. So as we look at this next question for you, Jason, set the lineup for this. Burrow, Jones, and Dak. I think what we see from Dak, it's going to be hard to bench Dak right now. When we see Dak performing exceptionally well, it's a Chiefs team that's going to keep this game very close. And does the matchup necessarily favor quarterbacks against the Chiefs? No, not necessarily. But they do get around 24-ish pass attempts. The problem is, how many touchdowns is he going to see? I do think that Dak is a great play this week. And I would start him over Daniel Jones against the Texans. And I probably still would start him over Burrow. I'm a little, like I said earlier, I'm a little bit undecided on Burrow. Now, Jacoby Brissett is absolutely a very interesting quarterback when we look at the slate. He's slinging the ball. He has the highest attempts of any quarterback on the slate. And they play the Buccaneers, who have been really, really not that great on defense. We saw Matt Stafford light them up. So in my mind, it's Dak or Brissett. All the other ones are kind of off to the side. I would favor Brissett over Dak in this situation, but I could absolutely see why you would want to start a guy like Dak as well. Barkley, Javonte, Kyren, and Hampton and Tracy. I do think that when we look at the matchup, I think this is a game where they're going to want to utilize Javonte Williams. Kansas City has a great rush defense, but they do offer around 17 attempts per game. And if you give Javonte Williams 17 attempts or around 17 attempts, I think he's going to be perfectly viable and perfectly usable. Now, when we look at Kyren Williams against the Panthers have had a surprisingly more stout than last year rush defense. They offer around 23 total attempts. If that's split 50-50, Kyren's going to have 12 attempts to do whatever Kyren can do, plus having red zone touches. That's not something that I'm absolutely happy or giddy about. Barkley's usage has been interesting in many different ways over the past couple of weeks. Against the Bears, I'm starting him as well. So I'm going to go Barkley and Javonte here, and I gave you the reason why I didn't really want to start Kyren in that situation. Wide receivers, you're starting Chase. Higgins is out. You absolutely have to start Chase. You're starting Nico. He is the number one threat on that team, and he will continue to do that. I'm not concerned about that. Then we look at these wide receivers. Now, coming out of the bye, will Courtland Sutton get a good amount of looks? That's one of the biggest questions that I think I have coming out of this bye. The Commanders are a team that he can absolutely light on fire. So I do think that I'm still rolling into Sutton this week. So for me, it's going to be Brissett, it's going to be Javonte, it's going to be Barkley, Chase, Nico, and Sutton. And then obviously you have Kittle there. So then we look at the two flexes. And I think by default, because of injuries to both London and Terry, that you do have to land on two of these running backs. And we don't know which one yet because injuries are not settled out yet. If Hampton plays, I think that you can easily land on Omarion Hampton. He's probably not going to get a full workload, but against the Chargers, like I said earlier, the same reason for Vidal. I think he's absolutely a guy that you can lean into. And then the Giants with Tyrone Tracy. It's going to be a little bit of a tougher matchup, but I think that whatever quarterback is there is going to make that game hyper competitive. So I'm leaving Kyren on the bench this week, I believe, leaving London on the bench if he's not healthy, Terry on the bench if he's not healthy, and going with the gut there, going with the stats. Do you think Rico can put up some decent points tonight? LL, yeah, absolutely. I think he at least gets 70. I think he's locked in for around 70 rushing yards. I could see this as being a game where he absolutely can get 2 touchdowns with the way that San Francisco plays defense. So right there, you're locked into around 22 points. I think that is a good ceiling for Rico Dowdle this week. I don't see anything, like I said, I don't see anything really realistically less than 10. So if something were to happen that would really take things in a different direction for them this week, I just don't see less than 10. So when you look at a ceiling, I'm thinking somewhere in the 22 to 25 category, and I think that you could take that to the bank. And let me answer this here, Jason, hopefully a little bit quicker than before. So out of all those guys, I still am on Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett's been on fire. He hasn't let you down. And I think that he's locked in for at least 2 more touchdowns, and he's going to get an amazing amount of attempts. So I think that you walk yourself into Brissett. He does not have the rushing upside that a Brock Purdy, Bo Nix, or Trevor Lawrence would have with a late game rushing touchdown. But I think that he's locked and loaded for a good amount of passing attempts. Keeping in mind that when we consider passing attempts and we consider the Buccaneers, right? And this is just based off of last week's stats as well. Tampa Bay, over the last several weeks, has offered 34 pass attempts to quarterbacks. Okay, 34.5, which is the sixth highest in the league. Okay, and so San Francisco this past week was, I just think that what you're going to get here is a game that's going to be more competitive than people want to make it out to believe. 34.5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sixth in the NFL in that. Yes, they are not giving up a lot of fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. That's only around 13. But they're giving up a lot of passing yards, a lot of passing attempts, and Jacoby Brissett can do a lot with that. So I'm on Brissett for that reason. I could see any other reason why you would want to start any of those other guys, but I think that I'm rolling with Brissett. In terms of the running backs here, like I stated earlier, I think in this specific iteration of this lineup, I think you have to start Rico Dowdle, even though the matchup isn't going to be great for Rico. And I would start one of those running backs for the Chargers. If it's leaning that Hampton's going to get over 75% of the carries, I think that Hampton's your guy. If they're leaning more toward Hampton only getting about 25% of total touches for him, then you lean Vidal. Monangai, I don't think is startable this week, even though he's going to get the reins. And then I think I land on Zonovan Knight there. So Bam Knight, Zonovan Knight, I think that it's Knight, Rico, and Vidal are probably those 3 running backs that I would start. Pollard's off, Tutin's off, Stevenson, Neal, not much upside there. Puka and Nico are my must starts at wide receiver there. Let's take a look at the Tet here. Tet's going to be a tough play for me, but if the Panthers want to be competitive with the Rams, they're going to have to get him the ball. But I don't know if the Rams are going to be able to. I don't know if you want to play a wide receiver against the Rams right now. There's going to be a lot of targets for Tet, but it might be a low output yardage game. I don't think he can bench Wandale. And that's a weird thing for me to say. If you've been with us since last year, we've talked a lot about Wandale Robinson over the last couple of years. He's a PPR merchant. And when we look at New England, they're not the best at stopping wide receivers. They do offer a good amount of targets per game because, again, teams have to come back against them. So when I look at this and I see, okay, like, if you're offering Wandale Robinson upwards of, 16 or so receptions, or not 16 targets, I think it's a possibility that he can really overperform. So for me, out of that list, it's definitely Wandale Robinson as my third wide receiver. So far we have Jacoby Brissett, Rico, and one of the Chargers running backs. And then in my flex, I'd probably be flexing Bam Knight and Shakir over Tet because I'm just not sure how the Rams will allow Bryce Young to do anything against them. I mean, we saw a really poor performance from Baker before he got hurt, and we saw a really poor performance from Teddy Bridgewater. So, I can't be on Tet this week, guys. So it's Puka, Nico, Wandale, Shakir in my flex, and then Rico, one of the Chargers running backs, and Bam Knight in my other flex. If you wanted to start Tet over Knight, or if you saw that Charger split was going to be weird and you wanted to put Tet in your flex too, it wouldn't be a bad call. My second league, I'm asking for a miracle. I have 111.17 Quincy, and I have 111.17. 102.16. He has Bryce Young. Do I think I pull it off? So Bryce Young overperformed last week, but depending on your scoring, Quincy, Bryce Young could totally throw an egg this week. Again, San Francisco doesn't have an elite pass defense at all. They're quite a sieve. But one of the things to keep in mind is the fact that we look at it and we say, okay, like San Francisco's bad, 39 pass attempts per game over the last 4 games on average, right? And then we take a look at their rushing attempts, and they've been giving up around 20 rushing attempts per game. The only thing that you can hope for in this matchup is that they just give the ball to Rico Dowdle. I think Bryce Young is going to get at least 2 touchdowns today, though, so that could be quite problematic for you. But if he sits somewhere in like 165, which is totally within his capabilities, and 2 touchdowns, you might win that by like 0.17. So I think it's possible that you have a chance in there. Gadsden was your other tight end, Mick. Let me look it up. Okay. Gadsden was your other tight end. Yeah, that still doesn't change my mind about who I would go after. And honestly, I'd trade Gadsden with one of those other pieces that we mentioned to try to get, even if you want to trade Gadsden for Jacoby Myers straight up, I think a lot of people would do a trade like that, in all honesty. So when we take a look at this question here, should I drop Luther Burden or Booty for Tillman? The question is, and we said this last week, is do you think that Shedeur will continue to be able to perform well, right? Or do you think that they're going to be in catch-up mode for a good amount of these games? This week, coming back, this is the third week back from being injured for a long period of time. 4 targets, 3 targets. Is it something that I want to invest in? No. I don't think that Cleveland has a good passing offense. Now, Luther Burden, on the other hand, the question with the Bears is Luther Burden. He was on the field for 33 snaps out of Caleb Williams' 65. So he was on the field for half the snaps and got a route on 5 targets. For 23 routes were run. He got a route on 5 of those. He got a target on 5 of those routes. Then we take a look here at Booty, and Booty's one of those players that we've talked about Booty before. And last week, Booty was one of the guys that I said, yeah, I'd like to start him because he does have that big play potential, but he does a low volume guy. He got more low volume this week. This is a game that favored Hunter Henry. So for me, I'm not dropping Luther Burden because, again, they're still dedicated to passing the ball in situations that dictate it. And Booty is so hit or miss that you're probably never going to start Booty unless the matchup is like really stellar. So for me, if I wanted Tillman, I think that Booty and Tillman are kind of like the same kind of piece, but just understand that like this offense for New England might not have a lot of long passes in it coming because of the injuries to the offensive line. So I'd keep Luther Burden. I'd drop Booty for Tillman, but would I really want Tillman? Not really. I have Juwan. Would you drop him for Theo Johnson or Fanning or Brenton Strange? As you guys know, I really like Juwan Johnson. Like I said, overall, the Saints are a very underwhelming team. But Juwan Johnson is a stable force on this team. He got 7 targets last week. Yes. Was this the best performance for Juwan Johnson? No, it wasn't. But any tight end that's getting 7 targets, 6 targets, 5 to 7 targets is going to be worth starting. He caught 6 passes for 46 yards. I don't think he's worth dropping to pick up Fanning or Brenton Strange or Theo Johnson unless you absolutely wanted that week 17 matchup, I think it was, that we talked about for Brenton Strange. I just dropped Juwan then. But the thing is, Juwan Johnson in the next couple of weeks, okay, this week they draw the Dolphins. They're going to have to pass to catch up in that game. They're not going to hold the lead in that game at any one point in time, okay? Then they play the Buccaneers, which, again, you're going to pass the ball on the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers do have a slightly better than average tight end market, against tight ends. But again, if he gets volume, he's going to be very, very relevant. So I think that for that reason, I'm sticking with Juwan Johnson. If you wanted to pick up Theo Johnson, sure, but I think Juwan Johnson, from a volume standpoint, is very, very comfortable right now. While he doesn't have the upside of a Theo Johnson with touchdowns, and while he doesn't have the upside of the touchdowns with like Brenton Strange or potentially Fanning, he does have the volume. And I think out of tight end that I want volume right now with a little bit of upside. He did catch a touchdown a couple weeks ago. Standard league here, we buy homes. Start one quarterback, one wide receiver, and one flex. Dak or Daniel Jones, Diggs, Igbuka, or Jettis, Benson's, Henderson, or Hampton at the flex. So for me this week, like I said, I think that Dak is a great play this week. I think that Dak is always a good play, if I'm being honest with you. Against the Chiefs, now, as we've talked about before, Chiefs games are tending to be a little bit more on the competitive side at certain points in time. Kansas City does have a really good metric for against quarterbacks, right? They're not offering a lot of touchdowns to quarterbacks over the last 4 games. So when we come in and we take a look at who have the Chiefs played in the last 4 games, we will be able to kind of talk about this a little bit more, right? So over the last 4 games, these are the Chiefs' opposing quarterbacks: Bo Nix, Daniel Jones, Josh Allen, and then Jaden Daniels with Marcus Mariota, right? So Marcus Mariota threw 2 interceptions, did get a touchdown, got over 200 yards, had 30 pass attempts. When we have Josh Allen here, Josh Allen threw for 1 touchdown, had 26 passing attempts. We come down to Bo Nix. Bo Nix threw 37 times for 300 yards, no passing attempts, or no touchdowns. And Daniel Jones threw for almost 200 yards on 31 pass attempts for 2 touchdowns. So while the stats say that, yeah, going against Kansas City isn't great for the metric of passing touchdowns, and their cornerbacks do play a little bit better, I think that none of those teams, when you look at all of those teams that they have played, none of them have the receiving options like the Dallas Cowboys have. Like you aren't looking at the Colts, and you aren't looking at the Bills, and you aren't looking at the Commanders, and you aren't looking at the Broncos and saying that they have that they have 2 of the best pass catchers in the league. But you can say that for the Cowboys. And I think that going across the totality of the season, that realistically the only times that has happened where they played 2 really top-notch wide receivers was week 2 against the Eagles, right? And then again against maybe the Lions, October 12th. When you look at that game, Jared Goff threw for 2 touchdowns in that game. When you look at the game for Justin Herbert, he threw for 3 touchdowns. And that was the first game of the season. You look at the Eagles, Hurts didn't throw for any touchdowns in that game, but that's totally a Jalen Hurts thing. And Trevor Lawrence threw for 1 touchdown back in the day against the Chiefs. So I do think that Dak is a better play than Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, again, this matchup is going to be tougher for him. It's going to be very competitive, and they're going to try to isolate and box out Jonathan Taylor in that game. So Daniel Jones could absolutely reach the same kind of upside as Dak. But I think Dak is more comfortable. And the other reason why I think that is that this pass rush for Houston is a bit better than the Chiefs. So they can generate a bit more sacks than the Chiefs. So I think Dak is the play there. As it goes to these other guys we buy, it's unfortunate that Baker got hurt. Because we don't really know how Igbuka will perform with Teddy Bridgewater. Assumedly, there hasn't been a lot of reps for a rookie with the backup quarterback a bunch over the last several weeks, especially considering that Igbuka was dealing with a little bit of an injury as well. But I still think that you have to start Igbuka here. And the reason being is that we really don't know what the Vikings quarterback situation is going to be, right? We look at the Vikings depth chart, and, you question, all right, well, they started an injured Carson Wentz longer than they had to because they didn't want to play the backup. Now J.J. McCarthy is dealing with concussion protocol, and they're going to put out Max Brosmer, okay? I can guarantee we all haven't heard of Max Brosmer except the fact that they didn't want to start Max Brosmer, Okay. Am I even saying that right? Brosmer. Could he be good? Sure, he could. Will he know to throw the ball to Justin Jefferson? Probably. But again, the same reason for JJ McCarthy, where it was like, okay, it was 11 targets, but were they good targets? No, not necessarily. Is this a week where they could take advantage of it? Sure, it absolutely can be the week that the Vikings take advantage of it. But unfortunately, like, I'm not going on Justin Jefferson because I don't know what this quarterback situation is going to be. So I think by default that I am on Diggs at my wide receiver position. If I'm seeing good practice reports from Igbuka and Teddy Bridgewater and it's looking good, you could lean a little bit into the Bridgewater Igbuka side. But right now I'm on Dak and I'm on Diggs. Okay. Diggs has a low volume output potential as well, but I think that it's safe to say that that's going to be something to look into. Now with Benson, Henderson, and Hampton, all of these, it really depends on if Benson is playing, right? If Benson is playing, there is a little bit of upside to him. If Hampton is playing and he's getting the full complement of snaps, there's a lot of upside to Amari and Hampton. And with Henderson, we have seen his upside on a week-to-week basis. Now, the question is, will he get that same amount of volume this week? If you get 18 carries out of Trevion Henderson and you get like 3 to 4 targets and he could break one against this Giants defense, again, the Giants just got throttled by Jahmyr Gibbs. And while Trevion Henderson isn't Jahmyr Gibbs, you can profile him very similarly as Jahmyr Gibbs in some situations. So for me, I'm on Dak, Diggs, and Henderson. But if I'm getting a good report out of Hampton, maybe I would start him. But I think for right now, as we sit, that Henderson would be my guy there at the flex. Mick, I could probably get Diggs for Judkins, but Waddle owner is the best friend. And I don't know if he would budge for just Judkins. I tried to get Waddle last week straight up for QJ during the bye, and he said no. But it really depends. It really depends, Mick, on how he's projecting, right? If he needs a running back, I think he's very likely to want a running back, and it's a fair enough swap in that discussion. If you want to add, say, Judkins and Tez or Judkins and Slayton or Watson or something like that, guys that you know you're going to have a hard time or you don't want to play on a week-to-week basis, I think that it's a fair enough way of thinking about it. See if you can work your magic a little bit there, because I think Waddle's a guy that I really do want moving forward. Do you think Winston deserves to be the starter for the Giants? It just looks better to me. I think Winston, every time Winston plays, we have to remember this, guys, going back, like Winston's also one of those guys that in college was a stellar performer, right? 31 years old, older now. But when you look at him throughout the totality of his career, this is a player who, while he didn't rack up wins, he could rack up touchdowns on the scoreboard. He was very, very turnover prone in his career. But given the reins of an offense, he is going to do what he can do to help that offense win games. And when we look at it from that perspective, right, you go back to Cleveland last year, 13 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, an 80.6 passer rating. Okay, QBR really low because of all the interceptions. You go back to 2021 when he was with the Saints. He played 7 games there. He had 102 passer rating, 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Okay, so we look at a quarterback here that while he's not the future of the franchise, if they want to save the future of the franchise from getting injured again from his play style, get him back with Scatterboo next year, you could see them lean on Winston a little bit until they fully know if Dart is healthy. Because it makes no sense in my mind if you have a young player like that who's dealing with concussion protocol, who does tend to drop his head and whatnot, to just play Winston and see what happens. The fans just want to see a winning game, right? And you could talk to Michael about this. You just want to see your team win. And whatever quarterback gives you a chance to win, you want to see play, right? So that's how I feel about that. I talked a little bit why I don't like Kyron this week, but Kyron can fall in the end zone twice and still perform well. Would I start him over Hampton still? Yes. Would I start him over Benson still? Yes, because he does have that touchdown upside. But if I'm getting good reports on Hampton and Hampton's trending, if Hampton is trending to play, like I said, over 60% of the snaps, yeah, I could see myself flipping Hampton into Kyron, but at this point in time, no. Benson's off the IR. Would you drop Sutton, Alec Pierce, or Swift or Harvey for him? That's a really tough question. Because the Bears are riding the hot hand in Chicago, you kind of want to say that Swift would be the guy that you would want to drop. But because Swift always does have that potential to do well in a comeback performance, I think he would be hard to drop. And Joe talked to you last week about why he didn't like DeAndre Swift last week. Kudos to him, right? But we're coming off a performance of 21 carries and 90 yards the week prior, and then down to 8 carries for 15 yards. So do I think it's time to write off Swift? No, I don't. When we look at the schedule moving forward for the Bears, we have the Packers, which could be a tough matchup, the Browns, which could be a tough matchup, and then Packers again could be a tough matchup. In all likelihood, if my trade deadline hasn't passed yet and you wanted to trade DeAndre Swift, he gave us good work for a couple of weeks. You could trade him. I could see myself, again, I really like Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce didn't perform well this week, as we expected him to not perform this week against the Chiefs secondary. But I do think that Pierce has some good games on the horizon. Looking forward here to week 13 and week 14 here. The Colts against the Texans, this is going to be another tough matchup for Pierce, probably. Colts against the Jaguars, that's going to be a good game for Pierce. And then as we look for Seahawks, that could be a good game for Pierce as well. If you don't see yourself starting Pierce over the next 2 games and you see yourself more likely starting Benson, then I would drop Pierce for Benson. But also, I just dropped the pretzel on the ground. But also, Sutton hasn't been doing much. And while it seems a little absurd to banish Cortland Sutton to the shadow realm of the waiver wire, I don't necessarily see it as a fundamental problem. So for me, it'd probably be Pierce to bring Benson or Sutton, and I think it's dealer's choice on what you really want to be dealing with there. Am I dropping Jamos South? Can't really trust him in the playoffs. You can't, but that is Jamos' thing, okay? They didn't have to use him to the extent that they've had to use him in other games. So when we look at Jamo is one of those guys where, yeah, he is up or down. We know that that's kind of his deal. But looking at the snap count, he's played 67 snaps. He ran a route 44 times, but he only got targeted 3 of those times. Jahmyr Gibbs got 12. Amon-Ra got 13. But that next week can easily flip back the other direction. And this is kind of the thing where in matchups where we're kind of expecting a big glow-up game from Jameson Williams, he doesn't glow up. And he is hard to trust. But that, again, that's the MO for how they want to use him. We look at this and we say, okay, against Cincinnati on October 5th, he had 1 catch. Then he comes back with 7, 2, 6, 7, 7. So is he hard to trust? Yes, but he is not droppable. He's absolutely not droppable right now. He's a trade if you want to trade him, but he's not droppable. But you know what you were buying into with Jamo. You put him in your lineup, hoping that the matchup carries him in. But where Jamo's going to be used here is in games where they can't find that rhythm with Amon-Ra and Gibbs. Okay? If they find that rhythm with Amon-Ra and Gibbs, you know that Jamo is going to be in for a rough night. But I think he's going to be fine moving forward. Besides Neal, any other waivers? Jason asks here, any other waivers I should target? Dylan Sampson, Rodriguez, Carter, Mechie, Dortch, Yoshi, Dyke. Even if I don't see myself, I'm grabbing Dyke. And people say DK. I'm not really sure how to pronounce his name, but I'm picking him up just because we know that the target share is going to be slightly condensed there with Cam Ward. And when we look at just in terms of the snap count in general for Tennessee, this is a game where Van Jefferson dominated the snaps, 68. Dyke was back there at 60. But Dyke ran one more route than Van Jefferson, got 7 targets. Now, he also got that punt return, so he's getting duties on punt return plus seeing the field. He's going to be a tough start on a week-to-week basis because it's going to be hard to materialize when he's going to get that volume. Last week, he didn't get that volume. This week, he did. But I think that Dyke is a great play. Now, Yoshi's very interesting to me because Higgins isn't playing this week. Jamar Chase is coming back with a healthy Joe Burrow. Yoshivas is definitely on the potential menu for the week. I'm not picking up Dylan Sampson. I think that's a red herring. Michael Carter is not on the menu as well. Rodriguez is really interesting. Rodriguez might be the RB1 there, it seems at some times. And then when we look at the Washington Commanders' schedule over the next several weeks, they're going to be pulling in up against the Broncos, the Vikings, the Giants, the Eagles, and the Cowboys. And there's only 2 games really that you kind of want to take advantage of, and that's that Vikings-Giants game. I think of the Broncos, he could take advantage of that, but overall, I think the offense is going to sputter. So I think that's a little bit of a hard get. And Mechie, we talked about Mechie last week, and as long as Tyrod Taylor is there, Mechie's going to be relevant. We look at the games that the Jets are going to be playing in moving forward, and we see teams that are at times struggling, at times not. Falcons, Dolphins, Jags, Saints, Pats. I absolutely think that Mechie's a great play. And like I said, as long as Harrison was out, Dortch is on the menu, but now maybe he's not. So in order of how I would want to prioritize these, it would be Dyke, it would be Mechie, it would be Yoshi, and then it would be Rodriguez. Just because I want to have – I think at this point in time, like Rodriguez again – unless Jane Daniels comes back and lights the world on fire, this is going to be a sputtering team. And I don't know if I want a running back from a sputtering team like that. Do you trust the Saints defense or the Bucs defense in the playoffs? I'm leaning towards the Bucs. I'm holding the Pats and Browns currently. I think the Pats and Browns are all you're probably going to need moving forward. But if I were to lean again, and this is based strictly off the matchups. And again, these matchups can go in one way or another depending on how catch-up is played. Now, if I go with the Bucs defense, here, Nick, what I'd be looking for is a healthy Baker Mayfield or a performance or some good performances from Teddy Bridgewater, okay? Because if I'm not getting that and the Buccaneers have to be on the field a decent amount, then that's going to be tough. Again, they draw the Falcons, which might not be the worst draw for them with Kirk Cousins there. Panthers, maybe the Panthers overperform in that game. Maybe they underperform. And then the Dolphins, who can overperform if given the opportunity. So that's slightly concerning to me from that perspective. And then when we look at the Saints schedule, like I said, with Tyrod Taylor there, that Jets matchup isn't as welcoming. But they also draw potentially the Teddy Bridgewater-led Buccaneers, the Dolphins as well, with the Panthers as well. So, and then they have the Titans at the back end of this. So, for me, I would try to target maybe the team that you think is going to project better with turnovers over the next several games. Bryce Young can definitely turn the ball over. Tua can definitely turn the ball over. Kirk Cousins can definitely turn the ball over. Tyler Shook can definitely turn the ball over. Teddy Bridgewater can absolutely do that. Tyrod can do that too. Cam Ward can do that as well. So when we look at from like a turnover perspective as well, then you got to come down where, all right, what running backs are these teams going to face? Again, they're going to be facing similar backs as well. You have Rico, you have Achane, you have Bijan, you have Devin Neal out of the Bucs, and then You have Tony Pollard, Brees, Rico, Bucky, Achane. And I think that I like the Week 17 matchup for the Saints better than the Buccaneers because Achane could always rip them for like 45 points. So I think that for some of those matchups, I do lean the Bucs, but that Week 17 matchup, I definitely do lean the Saints. Fairbairn or Little rest of the season. Little has been doing well enough. Let me pull up my kicker rankings really quickly so that I can give a better, more accurate take on this. So Cam Little, I think, is a kicker that, again, the Jaguars in general are a team that has been at times sputtering from producing points in the red zone. When we look at the next couple of weeks, they have Tennessee, Indianapolis, the Jets, Denver, and Indy again. I think you could absolutely see between 7 and 14 points from Cam Little on a week-to-week basis. Now, Fairbairn is one of those guys that I think can be a great kicker when healthy, right? He had that injury scare for the last 2 weeks, comes back and overperforms again. Indianapolis, Kansas City, Arizona, Vegas is absolutely some matchups that I want to take advantage of with the Chargers. I think that overall, no matter what quarterback that you're putting out there for Houston, that this is an offense that hasn't really had so many problems moving the ball, but they can sputter when it comes to the red zone as well. I put a slight edge to Fairbairn, although Little is going to be good enough. I think this is one of those dealer's choice situations where I want to take the kicker that's probably dealing with less weather over the next several weeks. So this week, Fairbairn's inside. Then he's at Kansas City. So that's, again, outside. Then inside, and then West Coast. That's Fairbairn's schedule. When you look at Cam Little is at Tennessee. Not much there. Then home again, then at Denver, and then in a dome. So that only game there at Denver could be slightly tricky. So lean would be towards Fairbairn because of that Denver game. I picked up Emmanuel Wilson this week, and he absolutely went off against the Vikings. Is he a 1 week wonder with Jacobs probably returning next week? Who cares, right? This is one of the things to know about the Packers is the Packers love running the ball. We said this last week. It's like it's weird where they have a quarterback like Jordan Love who can push the ball downfield and throw the ball, but McCarthy doesn't want to do anything to that extent. And Emmanuel Wilson, we were slightly concerned of how that line would perform, and it did well. I don't think he is necessarily a 1 week wonder. Would I throw him into my lineup this week again? Yeah. You can't take that performance and not want to replicate it to some capacity. And he has a chance this week to do that. You see his usage was great, right? He had 28 carries. If he gets 15 carries, yeah, of course it's not going to look as good, but it's still that usage that you want to see. They're running it the same amount of times that they would run Josh Jacobs, which is really good to see. So as long as Josh Jacobs is out, you could absolutely see them leaning on him again this week. CC, hurting with A.J. Brown and Wandale going off on the bench, started CD and Nico. It was the right play in theory, CC. Do the Eagles finally abandon the run? Is A.J. Brown trustworthy, or do we need to see more of him? So as I said on Thursday last week, CC, that A.J. Brown was one of those players that I was waffling back and forth on. I could absolutely have – I said it, that I absolutely could see a 100-yard performance from him. Wandale, the tricky situation with Wandale last week was would Winston overperform? And Winston did overperform against the Lions, and Wandale was hot from the very start. So the right call was to play CD and Nico in theory. And unfortunately, you just got hit on the other end of that overperformance stick. Now, is A.J. Brown trustworthy enough? I don't think he's trustworthy enough yet. I don't think that when we look at game script and And what they do, right? They always want to embarrass the Cowboys. That's something that the Philadelphia Eagles want to do all the time. Okay. Now, when we look at AJ Brown this year and where can we trust him again, I think that he's still in that same kind of framework as we've been saying all year, where he may not be the wide receiver one on this team from a stats perspective anymore, but he absolutely has the chance to blow up in games that dictate that they're going to utilize the pass a little bit more. When I look at the Eagles going forward, we have the Bears this upcoming week. We have the Chargers. We have the Raiders. We have the Commanders. We have the Bills. I see probably 3 more games out of that where they can overuse a guy like A.J. Brown. I'm not quite sure that it's there against the Bears because you could lean a little bit on Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts a little bit more, but absolutely against the Chargers for sure, and absolutely against the Bills, I think that they're going to overuse A.J. Brown. Now, against the Raiders, I think that they could underutilize him, but he could absolutely pop for 3 receptions, 80 yards, something like that. So is he trustworthy again? No. But is he worth starting again in some of these matchups? Yeah, I do think so. It's just a bummer that you were on the opposite side of that stick this week. Would you start Christian Watson? Josh asks, would you start Christian Watson, Luther Burden, BTJ, or Mechie or Dyke on waivers over Igbuka? Also have Marks in my flex. Should I start any of the above players over Woody Marks? So looking at it this week, like I said, I really love Igbuka, and Igbuka will get hyper-targeted at times. I mean, he had 8 targets, but he only caught 3 balls in the game. So with a week of practice, can Teddy Bridgewater make Igbuka fantasy relevant? Sure. Is it a bad matchup? Yes. So that's going to be rough. Now, as it goes to Mechie or Dyke, when we look at the Dyke's matchup this week, I could see myself potentially rolling with him in this Jags game, assuming that Io Manor, and again, like I said, Ridley's out as well. I mean, if Io Manor's out again, and that's something to keep your eye on, I'm absolutely wanting to start Dyke in that matchup. But again, it depends on if Io Manor will be out again. Now with Mechie, as I said last week, the targets, if they're going to throw the ball, the targets have to go somewhere. And if we're not getting good news on Wilson coming back, I think that you can absolutely lean a little bit more into Mechie. He's still considered week to week. Looking at the matchup here for the Jets are playing against the Falcons. The Falcons have not been able to stop too many teams recently. So Mechie's a guy that I do want to have. So for me, I know what I've said about Christian Watson. Christian Watson's a really high upside kind of guy. Same with potentially BTJ moving forward and Luther Burden potentially. But I think that Mechie and Dyke are better plays this week than Igbuka, just from the fact that we have evidence that says that Dyke and Mechie can be over-targeted in matchups that favor them. Dyke has that punt return upside as well, but he may not get a lot of targets if Io Manor is there. So leaning more into the Mechie side could make a lot of sense, knowing that he is the guy that they're going to target in that offense. Would I start any of them over Marks? No, I still think that I would put in Marks in a competitive matchup against Indy. So I would start Mechie over Igbuka. I would start Dyke over Igbuka if Dyke is going to get another week without Io Manor as well. That's really tough to say. Is this production from JT a sign of things to come with this Murderer Rose schedule down the stretch? That is what I was talking and alluding to a little bit earlier. While Jonathan Taylor is, one of those players that is absolutely every week has the potential to crush for 30 to 40 points. But the thing you have to ask yourself is that moving forward, how is he going to be utilized in these weeks, right? The Jags are a team that aren't generating much of a pass rush, but they can stop the running back to a degree. Then week 15, so after the Texans this week and then the Jags next week, week 15, the Colts draw the Seahawks, which arguably is another tough draw for the running backs that are facing them. So I asked myself this question. I say, Jonathan Taylor with 16 carries against the Jags is going to be much more useful, I think, than Zonovan Knight with 16 carries against the Jags, right? 19 carries for Jonathan Taylor is going to be really useful against Seattle, more than 19 carries for Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, right? So is it murderer's row? Yeah, sure. It's definitely not something that is exciting. But like I said earlier, is that you might see more floor games from Jonathan Taylor over the next several weeks because they might have to utilize or build in a different game plan in order to win these games. Because a lot of the times the game plan is probably just, hey, let's devote all the assets we can to stopping Jonathan Taylor and let Daniel Jones try to beat us. That's one of the reasons why you might want to start Daniel Jones. And he is a good rest of the season guy. But the fact of the matter remains is that JT can explode. He only needs a 69-yard touchdown run to potentially break the week and give you all the points that you need to win. So I think that it's still fine for him, but it's definitely one of those ones where his first half of the season was much, much, much more juicier than the next half of the season here. Start one, Lamar at home against Burrow or Purdy at Cleveland. Quincy, Lamar's been ass, man, from a fantasy perspective. And so when I look at it and I say, is this the potential to explode this week? Yeah. He might still be dealing with an injury. He might not fully be healthy. We look at his last 4 games, and since that Dolphins game, 4 touchdowns, he has only accounted for 1 other touchdown. And these are games that he should have accounted for more touchdowns. So there's a chance that because Cincinnati's rush defense is not very good, there's a chance that they really lean into the rush this week on a short week for Lamar. And I think that it's a tough start for Lamar this week. I understand that, like I said, it's a divisional matchup, but again, it's a short week. He's dealing with injury. He could light up the world, but this could easily be a game where you see Derrick Henry run for 3 touchdowns and Lamar throw for maybe 1 or 2 touchdowns. I do think that Brock Purdy has a slightly better matchup from that perspective. Does Cleveland play the quarterback better? Yeah, they do. Cleveland's only offering around 20 pass attempts a game to quarterbacks. But again, I think that Brock Purdy's a little bit safer. But the thing is about safe quarterbacks like Brock Purdy, right, is that if Lamar goes ham against Burrow on Thursday, you've got to look at that all weekend. And if he doesn't, you still got to look at that all weekend. So I think that Purdy has a safer floor. I think that Purdy is a good 2-touchdown guy. Cleveland's only on average letting up about 1 touchdown to quarterbacks on the slate. But when we look at who the Browns have faced over that span of time, this is what you're looking at. You're looking at the Raiders. You're looking at the Ravens. You're looking at Justin Fields as their quarterback as well. And then you're looking at Drake May. And Drake May threw for 3 touchdowns against them. So I would lean on Brock Purdy, and it really pains me to say that, but I'd lean on Brock Purdy a little bit more than Lamar this week. And that's just my opinion. Ace, trade Charbonnet for Tracy. I mean, sure, this feels to me like a decently lateral move. Charb's got outsnapped this week by Ken Walker. If you want to lean in on Tyrone Tracy, That's fine with me. He got 28 looks to Devin Singletary, or 28 routes run, 20 total carries. Devin Singletary still got a decent amount of carries. If we look at the Giants' schedule going at the end of this season here, I like the matchup against I like the matchup week 17 against the Raiders, and the Commanders and the Vikings are a great matchup too. So yeah, all things the same. If they're splitting touches equally, Sharps does have a better chance to get a touchdown on a week-to-week basis, but Tracy can give you a little bit more explosive plays. Quincy, with T. Higgins out this week, I need one running back, two wide receivers, two flexes. So looking at this, I think that Vidal and Hunt are probably going to automatically get into my lineup this week. The Cowboys do have a slightly better rush defense. And again, Hunt's not your big play guy, but I do think that they'll be able to move the ball into the red zone in order to generate a good stat line for Kareem Hunt this week. And again, Kamani Vidal is one of those players where if Kamani Vidal is going to get and I believe Pacheco's a little bit banged up as well. So Hunt is absolutely in that RB1 spot, locked and loaded this week for me. Vidal, if we're not getting good looks from Hampton over the course of the week, Vidal ends up in one of my flex positions. Looking at the other players on the slate here, I think you've got to start Jacoby Myers out of this grouping of guys. And again, this is, talking on Monday about this, but I do think that he projects decently well in this matchup. Now, wide receivers against the Titans, it's a favorable matchup. So if you needed to start both Tennessee wide receivers, if they were both or both Jaguars wide receivers, if they were both healthy, I think you could lean on both of those wide receivers if healthy. Now, Slayton is interesting. When we look at the matchup this week and we see against the Patriots, again, like I've said before, the Patriots matchup, the teams usually have to play comeback against them. And I think that if I want to roll with Darius Slayton, I absolutely could. If he's healthy, then he's one of those pieces that can be used. But the problem is that he didn't get a lot of looks, enough looks this past week to warrant me wanting to start him this week. So for me, it'd be probably those two Jags wide receivers to start with. And this is just speculating here on Monday as well. And then probably QJ. QJ in the flex to go along with Vidal. I know you don't like to start two players from the same team oftentimes, Quincy, but Booty's not getting enough work. And I don't necessarily see them this week having to push the ball to Booty, especially considering that that offensive line is dealing with a couple of injuries, and they're going to probably want to try to dominate this to keep this out of Jackson Dart or Winston's hands. So I don't see that Booty's viable this week. So for me, it's probably Myers, BTJ, QJ, Vidal, and Hunt. It's not necessarily so delightful, but it's something to think about. And Ace, I just mentioned this. I would take Tracy. You're welcome, Webuy. Absolutely. CC, I'm going to get to that DD there. Let me get to Jesse's question here. Would you drop Algier for Samson? Yeah. Here's why. So when we look at the Falcons here, they're having a hard time without Drake London generating much offense. And the offense that they are generating is coming in not in that money zone, right? So when I look at this and I see the snap counts and I see everything that's occurred here, nothing's really changed about Tyler Algier's snap count, okay? Nothing's really changed about Tyler Algier's usage, okay? But Tyler Algier is also not going to break off a 20 to 30-yard run for a touchdown, okay? It's not going to happen. And what we know is that in the games where he's projected well, he's gotten those touchdowns. So he's a very low floor guy right now if the Falcons are not able to generate any red zone usage. If we go in and we look at red zone plays from week 12, let's see if we can find the stats here from week 12. So if we take it from just this week, I can't sort it by this week only. But if we're looking at it from just inside the 15, let's call it from inside the 15, and we want to look for Tyler Algier. Tyler Algier ranks 15th overall in the season, 20 attempts this year. That's still in that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So around 17th overall. He's gotten 6 touchdowns within the inside the 15. When we take that inside the 10, Tyler Algier probably is sitting there with 5 touchdowns. Inside the 5, it's even higher. Okay, we sort that by 5 touchdowns. So we look at it and we say, okay, he's got 4 touchdowns inside the 5-yard line. And that accounts for a lot of his touchdowns over the course of the year. So if the Falcons are not able to generate any offense and they're not able to move the ball downfield, then yes, Dylan Sampson would be the better call there. But I don't necessarily feel the need to have Dylan Sampson either. Again, the same thing could be said about the Browns moving forward, but they do have some competitive matchups that you could absolutely lean into moving forward. But when I look at it and I say, okay, Dylan Sampson still only saw 19 snaps, had 7 routes run, and 7 carries. Okay. So 7 routes run, 7 carries, 19 total snaps to Algiers. 22 snaps, 6 routes run, 12 carries. So it's definitely limiting in terms of what you're expecting. If you're expecting a big play, it's probably going to be Dylan Sampson. If you're expecting a touchdown, you would want Algier to get into the red zone in order to get that. And I don't really see any of them doing that. So I'd go for the high upside guy with Sampson rather than banking on the Falcons getting into the red zone. Playoffs start in week 14, and Purdy will be on bye. Who's my best bet out of Shook, Bryce, Brissett, Jameis, Darnold, Lawrence? So Shook is out of the question. Shook has not been remotely competitive in terms of putting up good fantasy numbers week 14 or any week, right? So we take a look ahead to this week 14 schedule. And like I said, the Bucs is a good enough matchup for him, but he hasn't really thrown. I don't believe he's thrown for multiple touchdowns this year in any game. So that's problematic. When you're looking from a fantasy perspective. Yeah, he's only thrown for 3 total touchdowns since he's been a starter. So you can't lean on him. Now, when we look at Bryce Young, week 14, Panthers draw. Let me look it up here. Panthers will draw. Why are they not showing up for me? I don't know why they're not showing up for me. But yeah, the Panthers I wouldn't want to roll with Bryce Young either. Now, Jacoby Brissett draws a tougher matchup week 14 against the Rams. So, yeah, I wouldn't be leaning on that right now. Hold on, let me type for something here. Bye week. Yeah. So Bryce Young's bye week is week 14 too. That's why I couldn't find him. So you obviously couldn't lean on him. You don't want to lean on Shook. And Brissett is going to throw the ball a lot. But the problem is that against the Rams is probably going to be worse looks. I could absolutely see him having a 2-touchdown game with maybe 200 yards, but the Rams are a very good defense. Now coming down to 4, 5, and 6 here, week 14, we're looking at Jameis Winston. And what I'm seeing here is that the Giants also have a bye week 14, it looks like. So you cannot roll out Jameis. He is not available to you. Then we look at the Seahawks. They play the Falcons. And then we look at Trevor Lawrence. You're welcome, Quincy. Then we look at Trevor Lawrence from the Jags. And we take a look at their matchup. And they play the Colts, which is probably going to be a more hyper-competitive matchup than most people think. Now, when we look at the stats, so knowing that we've now narrowed it down to Jacoby Brissett, Darnold, and Lawrence, let's take a look at those quarterbacks a little bit more to see what projects better. Now, like I said earlier, the Jags over the last 4 games have been allowing 34 pass attempts, okay, and around 3 touchdowns through the air. So that's that game. If Daniel Jones does that, that game is going to be hyper competitive. When you look at the Colts on the backside of that, they've offered 37 attempts over the past 4 games with around 2 total touchdowns for quarterbacks. So this is a game that does profile well for a guy like Trevor Lawrence. Okay. A competitive matchup where it's going to be back and forth, where they're going to have to utilize it. Now, the Falcons on the backside of this have been awful. Okay. Now, take into consideration, they just played Tyler Shook. So, Tyler Shook was able to throw no touchdowns, but it threw for 243 yards on 41 pass attempts. All right. The Falcons over the last 4 games have been offering around 30 pass attempts and around 22 fantasy points to quarterbacks. So it's one of the highest in the league. Okay. You look at this and say, all right, week 14, Sam Darnold. Does this profile well for Sam Darnold? Abso-freaking-lutely. Sam Darnold can absolutely light it up against this team. Again, if you give Sam Darnold 30 pass attempts and you get him to 22 completions and you're allowing around 300 passing attempts, 300 passing yards, I think you got to rule Sam Darnold. Just speculatively speaking, could they lean on the run a little bit? Sure. But just looking ahead to week 14 here, speculatively, Darnold's the guy you want with Trevor Lawrence as that backup guy. But Sam Darnold is leaps and bounds the better play week 14 than any of these other guys on the slate. All right, guys, I am going to head off. We may or may not do a show on Wednesday. We'll if we do, we'll post it on Wednesday. We're definitely not doing one on Thursday. So if we do a show, we're going to do it on Wednesday. We appreciate all the love. If we don't see you before Thanksgiving, we wish you the best this week and a happy holiday. If we do see you, we hope to see you all in the chat. We appreciate everybody. Thank you so much. Local Football Flavor out.